Jacqueline, who's my wife and is sitting just over there, knows, I talked about writing this book for quite a long time. And it was really about time I got on and did it. And Ash turned up and asked me to write a book about tax, which is the subject for which I am best known. And actually, Ash, I've seen a book over here you'd like. It's called Essays in Taxation. Well, I declined the invitation to write that book at this moment when he came along and said, no, I really need to write a very different book, first of all, which has been sort of sitting around in my head and needs to be written, I think, at this moment because, well, some of you might have noticed we've got an economic crisis on our hands right now. And so I said I'd like to write a book called The Courageous State. Well, actually, it wasn't called The Courageous State then, because Jacqueline and I had a brainstorming one night, and that was the title that came out of the brainstorm. Yeah, it's wonderful what a bottle of Chardonnay can do. So The Courageous State was born. And in a way, you need to think about it as a bit like, well, this is my theory of moral philosophy, and the next one will be The Wealth of Nations. The next one's actually called The Joy of Tax. But this is the one, I promise you, that is the title. And I'm not going to let the publisher change it. And you can imagine what I want on the cover of the next book.
There's a joy of sex over there.
Yeah. Tax is the second most interesting three-letter word ending in X in the English language, it has to be said. But I needed to talk about why I felt governments needed tax to actually justify the next book. But I'd also been living with the idea for, well, actually, since 1976. Which does take us back to The Wealth of Nations, because that was the 200th anniversary of its publication, and it was the year that I became an undergraduate student in economics. And I had a slight advantage as an undergraduate student in economics, because I'd done A-level economics, and I arrived at Southampton, which was my chosen place of study, and discovered that they were going to spend the first year teaching me what I'd spent the last 2 years doing. Only they actually did it rather worse, if I'm totally honest, than my sixth form tutor, in fairness to Southampton. But it gave me the chance to reflect on what I was being taught, because second time round you have a little more time to think about things. And by the end of the first 10 weeks of that term, my first term in Southampton, I learned two things. The first was that it rains every day in Southampton. You might know that actually 1976 was, of course, the long, hot summer. But actually it rained every day of that autumn, and so I didn't have a single dry day that term, and I'd also discovered that I really was not in love with neoclassical economics anymore. And the love affair ended then and has never been resumed. I thought I might end up my career as a student, becoming, doing the conventional PhD academic route. But no, I realised by the end of the first term that there were other more interesting things to do, politics, editing the university newspaper, anything frankly, but doing economics, and I was going to go out into the real world thereafter and discover what it was really about, and then go back at the age of 40 and begin teaching it. That was the plan, and I did go out into the real world. I became a chartered accountant. I trained with the biggest office of the biggest firm in the world at the time, KPMG, well, Peak Marwick it was in London. And then I set up my own firm, and in parallel became an entrepreneur and set up at least 10 companies along the way, which gives some of my opponents on the internet some real problems, because they say, how can you be a left-winger? How can you argue as you do? And how can you have been an entrepreneur and apparently made profit? And I say, no problem whatsoever. I can reconcile those two quite easily. Because the world, you see, just isn't as black and white as you economists like to think of it. And I'll tell you something else as well. Not once, not ever, in my career have I maximised profit. Not only for myself, but I've never done it for a client. As far as I know, I've never minimised a client's tax liability, and none of them has ever sued me, although they all presume that they should have done. I don't know what profit is. I wouldn't know how to maximise it if I knew what profit was, and I'm pretty darn sure that if I tried to, I would be very miserable, and so would everybody else around me. In other words, most of those fundamental assumptions that you actually bring to your economics are wrong. And actually, I was sort of just so bored with an economics, which all was based around that graph. That graph is really fundamental. It's page 109.